In this video, we want to cover basically what is the backbone of training. Now, this is referring to progressive overload. In my previous video, I talked about stress, recovery, and adaptation, and that three-segment process in which your body essentially adapts in response to a stress that we apply to the body, given that stress is sufficient enough in order to stimulate that adaptation. Okay, so essentially, we need to make sure that your training overloads your system and encourages it to adapt. So the stress or the stimulus, as I said, needs to be sufficient enough. So let's say that is sufficient enough. How do we make sure that your body continues to go through that three-segment process in order to continue to adapt? Because doing something that is worth adapting to 1 week might not be enough to do the same thing every single week and still see continued adaptation 2 months down the line. So essentially what you want to understand about training is, yes, training and working out will offer the body a stress or a stimulus, and if you train hard enough and you overload your system enough, then you will encourage your body to adapt and go through this entire process. But if you don't continue to increase what you're doing, increase the weights you use, increase the reps you use, continue to elevate the level of stress that you're applying to the body, then what happens is the body will still go through this process of stress, recovery, and then adaptation. But if you continue to do the same thing, your body essentially has adapted to it already over time, and the amount of time can be a little bit up in the air. But essentially your body will stop adapting to it because, I don't want to say it gets used to it, but for want of a simple description, that's essentially what happens. If your body's adapted to do a certain task and you keep doing the same task, after a while your body has created the adaptations required and it doesn't need to continue to adapt. So this is where progressive overload comes in. And as I described, we want to continue to elevate the level of stress, and how we do this and how we manipulate the level of stress or stimulus we're applying to the body, well, there's loads of different ways we can do this. The main ones that we want to look at, because they're the easiest to track and probably the most valuable, probably the most powerful and valuable, as I said, are increasing the weight and increasing the reps in our workouts over time. But that being said, there are many ways to increase the stress on the body. We could spend more time under tension for the same weight and the same amount of reps, but just by slowing the weight down. We can improve range of motion, and that can be a great tool as well. We can also increase how much total workload or how much total volume we do per session, meaning if in 1 week we're doing 3 exercises in a session for 3 sets each, then the next week following up, we might do a 4th exercise. This would be an increase in stress and therefore stimulate or basically provide the progressive overload that we're looking for. So progressive overload is the elevation or the continued escalation of stress in the body to make sure that we continue to have a reason to adapt. Without this continued reason to adapt, we would essentially adapt for several weeks and then just stop, and that would be it. So progressive overload usually is focused on by increasing the weights and reps in your program or in your training. But as I said, there are many ways in which we can stimulate progressive overload, and some are better than others and some contexts suit better than others. But just understand that when you're in your training, you have to always have a keen focus on making sure that there is some element of progressive overload, and however you track that is up to you and or your coach. And if you're working with myself, we will already have discussed progression schemes and things for you to follow. So that is progressive overload, and my recommendation is never get complacent throughout your development over the years. Never get complacent and forget that that is the backbone of what we're trying to do.